Okay. Hi, I am
Hi.
super excited. This is a long time coming. I met Ashley on Instagram a few years ago, and we talked about doing this a few years ago, and we
Right.
never got around to it. So I am super excited to hear your story. So I'll just have you jump in, just introduce yourself, a little bit about you, and then jump into your story. And I am super excited to hear it. So go for it.
Okay. So my name is Ashley. I live in Michigan. I'm a mom to, well, I guess three kids now. I have two boys, 12 and 7, and then we recently um, took over guardianship of a girl. Her name is Olivia. She's 16, and then my boys are Braden and Barrett. Um, and yeah, I don't know. I've been married for almost 15 years, and I guess I'm a stay-at-home mom. I homeschool my kiddos, and that kind of just is my everyday consuming of my life. So, um, but yeah, so I had a liver transplant. I also was born with biliary atresia, and I ended up so like I didn't even realize when I needed to have a liver transplant that it was the result of like biliary atresia, like because I was 9. So I went a really long time. Now that I'm older and like talking to people, and especially with social media, talking to families whose babies are going through it and stuff, like it's not from what I'm told. Now, I know I'm no doctor, but from what I've been told, like it's not very common for a Kasai procedure, which is what I had when I
Mhm.
was born with biliary atresia, to kind of hold off the liver transplant as long as possible, because they typically say like that's the end result is always a liver transplant for
Mhm.
kiddos with BA. But yeah, I was told Kasai procedures don't typically last that long.
Yeah.
Like so for me it lasted 8 years or so.
Mhm.
Um And really, what kind of started all of it and what led to them realizing it was the liver transplant that was needed was I was in second grade. And I remember, and up to this point, like I wasn't sick. Like I don't remember ever, like I never had to go and get labs. Like all of my illness was before I was 2 years old.
Okay.
So, like, I don't remember being sick prior to my transplant. Um, and then in second grade, I remember it was my brother's birthday, and you're having cake and ice cream and everything. And then my grandma was like, "Oh, your lips are purple." And then she was like, "But nothing else is purple here. Like the cake wasn't, there was no explanation for it." So then she was like, "Well, why don't you, just kind of keep an eye on that." And then the next morning they were still that way, and then my fingernails were purple. And so my dad was like, "Okay, this is kind of strange." And but didn't think anything of it. And then a couple days, I think it was my gym teacher had told my dad, like, she really struggles in gym. Like, she can't run around the track. Like, she gets really short of breath, all this stuff. So then we ended up going to the doctors, and they checked my pulse ox, and my oxygen, I think, was like in the 60s or something. It was super low. And so then they, immediately I'm on oxygen. So then I'm like the second grader hauling this big old oxygen tank around. And long story short, that, tests, everything led to something was going on with my lungs, but they couldn't figure out what it was. They didn't know what was going on. Because I wasn't really jaundice, there was nothing really, I guess, showing any signs of liver failure. I don't know if it's like maybe they weren't testing for labs, because in my mind, right, you're thinking like that would have shown something.
Yeah.
But anyway, um, then finally, my dad took me back to my doctor that I had, I guess, when I was a baby. And he kind of was like, "I bet you it's her liver. I bet something's going on with her liver." And come to find out, I was like one of his cases that he would teach his students, because it was one of those like residency doctors, places. And so once he said that and they started doing tests to focus on my liver, they it was my liver was failing and it was starting to affect my lungs, and I developed, it's called hepatopulmonary syndrome, which basically is liver lung disease. And I guess it's kind of common for kiddos that have been born with biliary atresia. I've met a couple other people that's what they developed that led to their transplant. So, um, and then that just kind of resulted in me, like, I ended up going to the University of Michigan. And during all of this, I'm still on oxygen. They didn't really know exactly like what that would look like after I had the liver transplant, if I would need a lung transplant or if my lungs would just kind of go back to normal. But they had kind of just told my dad, like, let's focus on the liver. That's the primary source of what's causing everything. Nothing else other than my lungs were being affected at the time.
Mhm.
Um, and I guess it's easier to kind of move up on the transplant list if it's only for one organ as opposed to multiple organs.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, so then honestly, my brother, his birthday is in January, and then I had my transplant um in April. So a little over a year is all I waited.
Okay.
So April of the next year. And I don't remember, very much. One of the things I do remember is the day of my transplant, they showed me my liver. Like before I went under, they're like, "Do you want to see your new liver?" And I was like, "Yes." And so I saw it, and I remember coming out, and I was like coloring with some coloring pens with like colored pencils. And my grandma was like talking to me and stuff, and I'm like, "Oh, I saw my new liver." And she was like, "Oh, okay." And then the surgeons came in and she was like, she keeps saying she saw her liver. And they're like, "Oh, sometimes he will do that. Sometimes he will show the kids or whatever." And I was like, "Yeah, the veins inside or the lines inside were these colors." And I like put up two colored pencils, and the doctor's like, "There's no way she'd know that if he didn't show her." So then that was kind of cool. And I want to say it was maybe like a week or two, and I was off oxygen and I never had to go back on it. So, and I don't know exactly the time frame of when my dad was going to decide to look into being a live donor and when I actually had like an actual donor.
Mhm.
I don't know exactly that timeline, but my dad ended up not having to be a donor. It was a 16 or 17-year-old girl, and she donated her, obviously I got her whole liver. And I know my grandma has said that she tried reaching out to the family and we never heard anything.
Mhm.
um so we never really got any contact from anybody. And I have been told that, I don't know if anybody wants to know. I have been told by the like registry in Michigan at least that you can contact them and like say like if there's any way, I guess, to like find the donor. Um because I only know that because when my mom passed away, she was an organ donor and I was her like power of attorney and all that stuff. And so I found out through that. And they were kind of like, "Yeah, you can contact and you can find out like where your loved one's organs are going and like who they're going to. And they can, depending on if the donor's family has that information out there, you can find it." So um I personally have never tried to do that just because I feel like, I mean, I'm going to be 38 this year and their daughter, this was in 1996. I don't even, one, it's like, I don't know how old her parents were when that happened. So are they still alive? And so much time has passed. I feel like if they didn't want to have any contact in the beginning, I
Mhm.
don't know, I wouldn't want to like bring all that back up.
Mhm.
But, um, so that's kind of a really quick process of my transplant. I remember it's crazy because I don't want to say I had it easy because no kid has it easy going through this, but I feel like my story is pretty simple compared to other kiddos as far as like I didn't have a lot of complications.
Mhm.
I've been on literally the same rejection medication since day one, and in fact I really don't even take rejection meds anymore.
Really?
um yeah, so so I forget to take it, and that is highly, highly not recommended. But I do, as a mom, it's like one of the, I hate to say it, but it's like the last thing that I think of. And so, and especially in the mornings. So I would only take it at night, or I'd take it off, you know, every now and then type of thing. But I'm very consistent with my labs. I get my labs drawn every other month, and there's never any signs other than like my doctor's like, "Oh, your cyclosporin isn't even detected in your body." And it's like, "Oh yeah, because I forget to take it." And she never really like says anything. But in November when I went, I have a new doctor now, and it was the first time I met with her. And I kind of told her that, and I was like, "I'm going to be completely honest, I don't take it very frequently."
Mhm.
And she was like, "Well, your liver numbers and your kidney numbers look great because um with anti-rejection medications and those immunosuppressant medications, I was told by my doctors they do the labs now more to monitor my kidneys than
Mhm.
my liver because the anti-rejection meds do such hard stuff to your kidneys."
Yeah.
Um, but she was like, "Your numbers, kidneys and liver numbers, are the best numbers I have in my clinic." And she's like, "So," she goes, "I will never tell you not to take your rejection medication." She's like, "Because we just don't know. But studies are starting to show that there are some people that can, after years have gone by, they can get away with not taking them anymore."
Yeah.
So she's like, "It may be that little bit when you do remember to take them is just enough to hold off and like keep everything at bay."
Mhm.
She's like, "So," she's like, "I'm never going to tell you not to take them." She's like, "I will just say, keep doing what you're doing."
Mhm.
So that's kind of, I don't recommend it, um, but I do, think that it's crazy because with social media now too, it's so nice to see and like to be able to reach out to families like you. And I've met other families whose kids are like really truly in the thick of it right now.
Mhm.
And my goal when I first started like even putting it out there that I had a transplant, like my social media isn't like, you can't go to it and see right up front that I had a liver transplant, but I do try to bring it up, and I do try to bring awareness to biliary atresia
Mhm.
and things like that because it is important. But sometimes, if I'm being honest, I feel like my story is so different from everybody else's. So I focus more on like, your child will have a normal life. Normal, what is normal? But it's
Yeah.
like, I remember going to transplant camps. I don't know, whoever's watching this, if your kid is in the thick of it, I recommend looking into wherever you're at and see if they offer those because that was huge for me. And I have friends that I made in those camps that I still talk to today.
Mhm.
Um, and it was just really nice to see like there's nothing holding you back. You can do the same stuff that any other kid can do.
Mhm.
But then on the other hand, like these summer camps, we were in the lake, we were, horseback riding, zip lining, doing all these things. And then I've talked to one mom whose kiddo is a little over a year old and just recently had a transplant. And they were like, he can never be in a lake. He can never and I'm like, things just change like that in the medical world.
Yeah, that's
So
kind of what we've been told. So it's
yeah.
interesting. Yeah.
And I'm like, I've been in lakes multiple times since my trip. Like, and I hate telling people that because obviously, like, listen to your doctor,
Yeah.
but
Mhm.
it's just so, and even in the beginning, I was always told, and my parents were always told, like, only take Motrin. Do not take
Mhm.
Tylenol, stay away from Tylenol.
Oh.
And I remember my one time my transplant doctor, it was when I was pregnant with my second kiddo. I'm like, I know I'm only allowed to take Tylenol, but I was having really bad headaches and stuff. And
Mhm.
she's like, no, you're supposed to be taking Motrin. Or no, only take Motrin. I'm sorry. I'm like, I know I'm only supposed to be taking Motrin, but I'm having really bad headaches. Can I take Tylenol? And she's like, you are supposed to be taking Tylenol. Like, you're not supposed to be on Motrin. And I'm like, why? And she's like, because Motrin goes through the kidneys and we don't want anything else hitting your kidneys. And I'm like, I've gone the last like 20 years being told not to take Tylenol. And it's just crazy how I swear it's like every year I go to the doctor and it's something new.
Mhm.
Or like, and granted, I was 9. So of course, like certain topics are not going to be told to me as a 9-year-old as far as like having children or things like that. But um I remember when I turned 21, I asked the doctor, I'm like, am I allowed to like have a drink? And they were like, you can have a few. And they said it's safer for you to have a few drinks than it is to take shots. So like you can have a glass of wine or you can have a couple drinks. I personally, because of, this is a whole different thing, but because of family history, I don't drink.
Mhm.
And I also just feel like I want to honor my donor.
Yeah.
Like, and I don't feel like I don't want to take it for granted and
Mhm.
do something. Very, very rarely, I may have a glass of wine, like at Christmas dinner or something like that. But
Mhm.
I've never been the type to like just go out and party because I almost just feel like that's disrespectful to my donor.
Mhm.
Um, but that was just one of those things that's like, would I ever be able to do that? Or like have children? And I was always worried that I wouldn't be able to have kids because of the transplant, or like would they get biliary atresia? And it's one of those things that it doesn't get passed down. It's not genetic, and they really don't know what causes it or what doesn't cause it. And I will say I was high risk for both pregnancies. Like I had to see the high risk doctors. And my first pregnancy, they said the biggest concerns were because of the anti-rejection medications, you have a higher chance of preeclampsia. And they said that because the further along in your pregnancy you get, the chances of preeclampsia are higher just for a normal pregnancy.
Yeah.
And then it increases even more with the anti-rejections.
Mhm.
So they scheduled me to be induced at 37 and a half weeks. And they're like, we're going to induce you. And it was crazy because they were like, we want you to have a C-section because we don't want you to push, because we don't want you to cause any hernias within the scar tissue of your stomach and all this stuff.
Yeah.
So I went this whole pregnancy like, okay, I'm going to have a C-section. And then I was like, but if I'm having a C-section, why would I have to be induced? Like, wouldn't you just schedule
Mhm.
a C-section type of
Yeah.
thing? And then one of my very last appointments with my doctor, she was like, there's no studies that show a transplant patient can't have natural birth. So then I went like 8.5 months thinking I'm having this C-section, to then they're like, nope, you're gonna push and we're just gonna induce you. And I was like, okay, that changes the whole birth plan. Um, but it all worked out anyway because I was induced and then he was positioned differently. So I ended up in a C-section anyway.
Um,
Um, but yeah, I never had any problems. They never had to adjust my anti-rejection medications. I never had blood pressure issues. When I got pregnant the second time around, I had asked my doctor, I'm like, can I just see you, like my regular OB? And then if something comes up, can I see the high risk doctors? Because
Mhm.
my first pregnancy, like there was no need for it. So
Yeah.
then they let me just stay with OB. And thankfully, I was able to have another one. But I will say they did kind of the doctor after I had my second one. And then I normally only see my transplant doctor once a year, but after my two births, both times, I had to see them after 3 months of giving birth and then 6 months after, just to
Okay.
like check my levels and make sure everything's good.
Mhm.
And I remember after the second one, they had kind of said, like, you have had two healthy babies and you stayed healthy. Like, I wouldn't push your luck type of thing. Like, I
Okay.
guess the more kids you have, like the
Mhm.
higher your chances are and of
Mhm.
complications and things like that. And so, um, which I kind of was like, I had my tubes tied after my second one anyway, so I wasn't planning on having more. I kind of felt the same way, like
Yeah.
I don't want to chance anything, but I thought that was interesting that my transplant doctor was like, yeah, we, you know,
Yeah.
don't push it.
Mhm.
Um, and then some of the other things that have changed is I think it was like 5 years ago, they told me that I started to have skin checks. I have to see the dermatologist once a year for
Mhm.
skin checks because I guess my rejection medication, I have like if I'm on cyclosporin, so I don't know if this is
Okay.
all rejection meds or if it's a cyclosporin type thing, but I guess it gives you 100 times more likely to have skin cancer when you're on that than not. Um, so they were like, we want you to have your skin checked every year, um, bone density scans every 5 years,
Mm.
and I have to wear sunscreen no matter what. And I'm like, again, this was like with just within the last 5 years. And I had my transplant in 96. So I'm like, and I was the high schooler who was in a tanning bed. I'm like, where was this information then? Like, oh my gosh. So but yeah, I just like to be the voice for the families that are really just in the thick of it.
Mhm.
um I know I'm part of a support group for the hospital that I had my transplant in, and the majority of the patients are adults. Obviously it's the adult transplant unit, but like really older people, and they all have good stories too, and then some of them are struggling, and then like I said, you see some of these kids who just it's up and down, or unfortunately it just doesn't happen. And then sometimes, if I'm being really honest, I feel guilty if I come on and talk about it, and I feel bad if I'm like, I'm perfectly normal, like, and sometimes I even feel like I can't relate, or like I don't belong, I guess, if that makes sense. Like sometimes I see these stories, or I see these different like foundations or like these different groups and things, and these stories that people are saying, and I'm like, I don't feel like I should be a part of that, because then I feel like kind of like it's not really, but like a survivor's guilt type of thing.
Uh-huh.
Not, I
Yeah.
don't mean that in a way of like, oh, poor me, but like, I don't know. I want to be that voice for people, and I want people to see that you can be healthy and like there's no issues. But then on the other hand, I don't want to be like, I know this is really hard right now and your kid is suffering. And then I'm sitting here saying everything's going to be fine. They live a normal life, and then their child doesn't make it.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, uh, you know, so it's kind of trying to find that balance of,
Yeah.
how much to say or not to say. And I just, in the beginning, when I was a kid, like I didn't like talking about it, because when you're younger, and I think you even had said your daughter recently was like that.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that for me it was big, because I remember shortly after well, even before, I was going to school with an oxygen tank. So then you're like the sick kid, and then they ended up pulling me from school, and I had a tutor. So I didn't end up getting held back. But then after everything, and I went back to school,
Yeah.
I look sick. I'm gone a lot for appointments or this and that. And I remember having like really bad veins like around my eyes. And so, and people would always come up and be like, what happened? Or what's this? Or what's that? And then, you have my dad, or like my mom wasn't around very much, but my grandma especially is like, don't do this, don't do that. And my dad became like this horrible germaphobe, and like, so then you're like, you feel like the odd kid out. So then when people are wanting you to talk about it, or they're asking you questions, and like my grandma, it was like every chance she got, she wanted to talk about it or be like, because she was also like, you know, you're so strong and look at all you went through, and I'm so proud of you, and like it is a miracle, and like not everybody's as lucky.
Mhm.
And you think like, yeah, I get it, but you don't want to keep hearing it over and over as a kid. Like you're kind of just like, let me just be a normal kid. Like
Mm-hmm.
I didn't ask for this. Like I'm so happy I'm alive, but you
Mm-hmm.
don't want to talk about it a lot. But now that I'm an adult and you see it, like your daughter maybe will be the same way. Like once she gets older and she realizes like, wow, like it did. It took me a long time to realize like I'm very, very blessed and lucky. And
Yeah.
it it is, even just like I was saying, seeing how so many people don't have the happy ending, it even is more proof of, as weird as it is for me to say, like I'm a walking miracle.
Yeah.
And
You
but
are.
then it's like, oh, you feel like, because you just see all these other people that are have it way worse than you or are struggling, and you just don't.
Yeah.
For me anyway, I'm like, I don't feel like I'm a miracle. But the older you get and the more life experience and life you see, it's like, wow, not
Mm-hmm.
everybody's lucky. And so
Yeah.
the least I can do is share my story and bring awareness to organ donation and biliary atresia, because that's another big one that,
Yeah.
you know, but
Oh, amazing. We have about 9 minutes left before it will
okay.
kick us off. So I just have a few questions. Oh, I relate to your story so many things. Yes, the part about Kendall not wanting to talk about it, and kind of what you said, whenever something like comes up about it, she's like, I just want to be normal. And
Yeah.
it's so funny because for me, I'm just like, it's so cool. You're amazing. You're a
Mhm.
miracle, like all this. And she's like, I just want to be normal. And so
Yeah.
that is interesting. I'm curious about the transplant camp. What age were you when you were going to that? Do you remember?
Yeah. So it was like, I want to say the very next year after my transplant. So either
Okay.
10 or 11. And
Okay.
I was a camper. And then I became a counselor.
Oh, cool.
And then one of my friends that used to go as a camper, she ended up staying, and she's a registered nurse. She kept going, and she was, a camper, then a counselor, and then she stayed on as one of the nurses for the nursing area. So they really allow you to stay.
Yeah.
And we actually, Ann Arbor, we didn't have like our own transplant camp at U of M. So
Mhm.
the first, I want to say 2 or 3 years, maybe four, we went to a camp in Pennsylvania called Camp Jehope.
Okay.
And it was basically strictly just like transplant kids.
Mm.
Um, but then Ann Arbor or U of M started their own camp called Camp Mishatonki, and
Mhm.
it's for transplant kids, but I do believe there was other kiddos there that had other um like terminal illnesses, not
Okay.
cancer, but like
Okay.
other illnesses.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I finished off, and Camp Mishatonki is where I was a counselor and things like that.
Cool.
And my transplant nurse, when I was a pediatric, she was the one that kind of got everybody on board to do the one in Pennsylvania. So we would all meet at Ann Arbor, and we'd take a bus and we'd drive to Pennsylvania, like all the campers from U of M.
Okay.
And then one year I missed the bus, and it was a year that my pediatric nurse wasn't going to go. Her and her sister
Mhm.
normally always went, and they weren't going to go this year. And my stepmom called my nurse, and her name's Vicky, and was like, "Hey, she missed the bus. She's not going to be able to go. Can you let somebody know she's not going to make it?" And my my nurse Vicky, her and her sister ended up picking me up, and we went and drove me.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And I still talk to Vicky today. Like
Uh,
it's it's crazy, the relationships that come out of something like this, something that
yes.
some may think is so traumatic, but it's like even just the relationships I've made now just through
Yes.
social media because of biliary atresia,
Right.
so
Yeah. That's so true. I feel like there's so many people, and it's like if I think about like, because of course sometimes you wish that that wasn't
mhm,
your story or whatever, but then it's like I can't even imagine my life without them, or
yeah,
like it really is amazing. And I think especially nowadays with social media and stuff, like there's
yeah,
so many people. I just feel like we've been friends for years and yet
Right.
like we've never met, you know?
Yeah.
So
Yep.
so cool. And yeah, the part about you having babies just makes me cry because Kendall's 9, and so when you were talking,
Oh,
I
yeah.
just was thinking about her, going through it at this age. And as hard as it was on me as a mom, I'm so grateful she was little because she doesn't remember anything.
Hmm.
But I remember when she had Kasai, and I remember her doctor saying, she'll never be able to have babies. And
Oh,
I
wow.
just remember like she's a baby. Like I don't know why he had to tell me that because
Hmm.
I wasn't thinking about that, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so for me, obviously she's 9, and so but I have just always been like, I don't want to research that. I don't want to ask because I just remember that memory. And so, like,
Hmm.
to hear you, like, and I know everyone's story is different. And I know some people, they decide to adopt because they're just not comfortable, which, like, I totally get. There are so many different situations, and everyone's
Hmm.
journey is different. But just hearing your story
Well,
just like warms my heart that, like, it's a possibility, like,
yeah.
just so
And
cool.
even my one friend from camp, she has had two babies, two boys
Mhm.
too.
Oh.
And there is a transplant pregnancy like registry that I
Oh,
signed up for, and they check in with transplant patients. I think it's like every 2 or 3 years to
yeah.
get data. And I
Hmm.
was asking the nurse one time when I was on there, it was shortly after my second, and I was like, do you guys see a lot of complications or
Hmm.
with not only the mom but with the baby and stuff? And she's like, it's not as like there's not as many complications as people think there are
Hmm.
with it. So, and I think too with science and medicine and everything, like it's just so different than even when I was 9. I mean, it feels like
Hmm.
ages ago, which it kind of was, but it's like, and I had a mom ask me one time too, like, do you wish that you would have been younger to where you don't remember, or do you like that you remember everything?
Uh-huh.
And I kind of like that I remember because it gives me more of like one of my dreams one day would be to just go to like a children's hospital and just speak to those kids and be like, this
Uh-huh.
is not your life. This is not your identity. This
Yeah.
is not who you are. Like, this is a moment in your life
Yeah.
that is going to change your life forever, but it's not your whole book. It's just a
Yeah.
chapter, you
Yeah.
know? So,
Love that.
yeah, but
Love
yeah.
that. So, I have a question. So, from when you were a baby, obviously you don't
Mhm.
remember like Kasai and that. And then
Right.
up until 9, I'm curious, like, were you, I guess you said that it was different back then. Like, were you, as each year went by, were you like nervous that you were going to have a transplant, or like, were you just like a normal kid in that range? Does that question
I
make
would, yeah, I had no idea. Like, my dad took me out of the room one day and was like, look, they're talking about having to have a liver transplant. We knew you would need one at some point, but they told my parents that it would either be within the first 3 years after Kasai, or that they thought it would be like once I was 16, 17. So
Okay.
my dad was kind of like, that's why we never told you. That's why we never brought it up, because we thought we weren't here yet. Like, they thought I was going to be older and more able to understand. So I never even knew that I was sick before. Like, I just thought it started at 9. I had no idea I was born with all this stuff. So,
I
yeah.
admire your parents because then it
Yeah.
can instill fear in you
Right.
until
Yeah.
oh, I love that. Love
Yeah.
that. Oh, that's so
Yep.
cool. So cool.
Yep.
Well, we have about a minute left. Anything else
Okay.
you would want to share? It was so good. I feel like there's so many parts of your story that I relate to, but I know that
Yeah.
other people will relate to. So just thank you so much. Anything else you want to share?
I don't think so. Just thank you. Thank you for
Of course.
having this platform and for asking me to join. And I
Yeah.
know it's been a long time coming, but I'm glad that you
Yes.
remembered because if I'm being honest, I was like, oh yeah, we did talk about that.
Of
So,
course. No, I'm so grateful. Yeah, your story's amazing. You're amazing. I love
oh,
what
thank
you
you.
do. And yeah, just thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay, see you later. Bye,
See
Ash.
you later. Bye.